الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة العالمين سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا قائد الغر المحجلين وشفيع المذنبين وسيدي ولد آدم الفخر محمد عبد الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أزواجه وذريته ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته وانتهج نهجه إلى يوم الدين. تركنا عن المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك وبعد. So alhamdulillah, I apologize for the slight delay. As you can see, we are trying to upgrade the connection to an HD camera that we're working with, so hopefully we'll have all the kinks worked out by the next time, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So as I mentioned, and those of you who are on the WhatsApp group, I did send out about half an hour ago a handout outlining what we will cover in this session, eschatology or as-sam'iyat, and this is considered traditionally to be the third subject or issue or broad set of issues that we study in Islamic theology or creed or aqidah, beginning with ilahiyat, so things that concern divinity and the divine attributes, and then over the past two sessions we went over an-nubuwat, which are the prophetic attributes. And now we will look at as-sam'iyat, which broadly defined as that which we would have no knowledge of unless we were informed by a source that is trustworthy, here in this case the source being the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are going to be things concerning the realms or the realm of the unseen, things that we cannot normally perceive. So it's often going to talk about things from alam al-malakut or alam al-ghayb, things of the unseen, things of the sovereign dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many of these things exist as we speak, as we will go over, and some of them do not. Some will come to exist later on. And there is obviously those of us who have already gone on to their alam al-ghayb or alam al-malakut, what we call al-haya al-barzakhiyya, so the barzakh, which is kind of the life between the two lives, so between the life of the dunya, that me and you and everyone else who's speaking and hearing right now, this is the life of the dunya, and then there's alam al-barzakh, which is in between, which is the life of the grave, the life of waiting for the resurrection and the events and the beginning of Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of resurrection, Yawm al-Nashr or Yawm al-Ba'th, also known as. So as we are taking our evidence for these things that exist from authentic sources, and there is a distinction then between what we know from as-sam'iyat in terms of epistemology, in other words, how we know what we know. So when we talked about the existence of God, which we did in the beginning sections of the book Qutb al-Arifin, and Imam al-Laja'i, he stated that taqleed, or just imitation and following in this regard, in other words taking authoritative report, is insufficient for kamal al-iman, for a complete sense of iman. In other words, he mentioned that people should be mujtahidun. People should be, the believer should have their own way and methodology that they arrive at their personal conviction for the existence of God or of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the bedrock, this is the foundation of iman. Otherwise, there is type of a circular argument if we say, well, I believe in Allah because the Quran says so. And then you'll say, well, why do you believe in the Quran? Because I believe in Allah. And then it's a circular argument. So even the Quran directs us to the way by which we can have a further and certain conviction in the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we mentioned this before in the previous sessions. أفلا ينظرون إلى الإبل كيف خلقت وإلى السماء كيف رفعت وإلى الجبال كيف نصبت وإلى الأرض كيف سطحت فذكر إنما أنت مذكر لست عليهم بمسيطر. So tell them, do they not see the way that the camel, the ship of the desert has been created in its perfection, and how the sky and heaven has been raised and the mountains have been upheld, and the earth has been made flat. Not that there's a flat globe, but the earth itself is musattah, has been made flat, and all of these there's a sign. And then it tells the Prophet ﷺ, Lasta alayhim bimusaytir, right? You are not someone who's going to compel them, you are just a mudhakkir, you are someone to remind them. So this tadhkir then is something that we should actively engage in. And the Sahaba used to say to each other, Ta'ala nu'min sa'a, let us go, jaddid imanana, or nu'min sa'a, let us renew our faith, or let us have a stronger conviction in our faith. So there's always things to be read, and there's always signs to be deciphered, and there are always ma'ani and meanings behind the mabani, behind the facade and the exterior outward projection of things that will give us a greater conviction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it need not be something that's like an amazing extraordinary occurrence and say, oh subhanallah, this person defied all the odds and what the doctor said and they survived the accident anyway. La qadr Allah, that happens to any of us. It could be in something as simple as you woke up this morning and the sun rose in the east, and you have yet another day to breathe and to live and to know your Lord. This is just as we could say extraordinary as the things that we think defy our experiential, customary take on things. So in all of those things there is a glory to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there is a means by which to know Him and have a stronger conviction. So that's in terms of Allah and His attributes. And then we also mentioned the prophets and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ specifically and his attributes. So similarly, we arrive at a conviction for the 4 reasons that we mentioned before, that we went over in the previous session. And some of them include the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them also include, as I mentioned, seeing the prophetic properties in attributes in other people, and knowing that it could have not come something of their own volition, but such perfection in character could have only come from an exemplar that was sent by God, and so forth. But as-sam'iyat, which we're discussing now, can really only be known by way of authoritative transmission. And here, this is when we get into the details a little bit of what is a mutawatir khabar and what is not mutawatir. So mutawatir, something that has been verified by many authoritative people and chains of transmission, such as that we would ordinarily find it inconceivable that all these people would have conspired to lie about it. So just like we may believe in a far-off land that we've never been to, like if you've never been to Cambodia or Botswana or Australia or New Zealand or wherever it may be, but you believe it exists nonetheless because you know for certain that so many people who have talked about it, they could have not lied about it. Or something that's historical. So we know the existence of our Prophet ﷺ. This is mutawatir, right? This is something that they could not have conspired that they made up this person called Muhammad, or they made up this person called Jesus, or they made up this person called Moses, and so forth. So by the same token, we know the sam'iyat, those things that are known by authoritative transmission. So if it's mentioned in the Quran, then immediately it becomes from the absolutely certain about, because the Quran itself is mutawatir. The Quran itself has been transmitted by many chains of transmission. If it's mentioned in the Quran and Hadith, same thing. If it's only mentioned in the Hadith, then we have to take a more discerning view and look at, well, is it mutawatir or is it merely just ahad being a singular chain of transmission, or maybe a few people, but not to the level of ironclad absolute certainty. This also will form part of our theology, but not in the same manner as things that are mutawatir. Things that are mutawatir, you have to accept it as a Muslim. Otherwise, your Islam can come into question if you deny it, if you deny something that's undeniable. So, I don't want to spend too much time on some of that technical stuff. Let's look at some of the things from the handout. And the order here is not a particular order of how they actually happened. This was the order that Imam al-Dardir, which I was referencing in Al-Khalil al-Bahiyya, is how he mentioned them. So I went in that particular order. So the first one, the reckoning or the hisab. All humans will stand before Allah in the gathering, or the mahshar, which is going to come after this, al-hashr. where they will be judged upon their actions, words, and beliefs. They will hear him, yani Allah, directly in a manner commensurate with his majesty, or they will hear the angels, or they will hear both Allah and the angels. These are differences of opinion amongst the ulama. So certainly there is a hisab, there is a reckoning, but in terms of how exactly that's going to be, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to speak to us directly, and then we are going to hear him, not by sound and not by letter, but in a manner that's commensurate with his majesty, like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa alayhi salam, or spoke to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam on the night of the Mi'raj, something of that nature. Allahu a'lam. Or it could be the angels, or it could be both Allah and the angels who are doing the reckoning or the hisab. And we also know the reckoning will differ, or the hisab, amongst people. Some it will come with ease. فَسَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا يَسِيرًا. So some people have hisab yasir. وَسَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا عَسِيرًا. And some will have asir. Some will be difficult. Some will be done secretly. In other words, only between you and God. No one else knows the hisab. No one else will see what you did or what you didn't do. And some openly. Right? Some will be like a fadiha, and some will be humiliated openly. For a select group, led by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, there will be no formal reckoning. الَّذِينَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ مِنْ غَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. The ones who enter into paradise without a hisab, without any formal reckoning. So this group will enter paradise without one. And the hadith mentioned that there are 70,000 of them. This number 70,000, generally speaking, we say it doesn't necessarily mean exactly 70,000, because 70 and 700 and 7,000, any kind of multiple of that is seen as just a large, complete and perfect number in Arabic language. So it could mean something more than that. Like in the same way when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Hadith al-Qudsi, الصيام لي وأنا أجزي به إلى 700 ضعف, that the fasting is for me and I will reward up to 700 times. So 700 doesn't mean 700, could mean 7,000, could mean 7 million. So that's why we also pray that we are amongst those who are entered into paradise من غير حساب ولا عتاب ولا عقاب ولا مناقشة حساب. So we don't want munaqasha of the hisab. We don't want to have this discussion between Allah, because the Prophet ﷺ said, when وَمَن نُوقِشَ فِي الْحِسَابِ فَقَدْ عُذِّبَ. Whoever is, it's a type of torment to have this munaqasha, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to say, why did you do this, and why did you do that, and why did you fail to do this? And this will be the perfect reckoning, right? The perfect justice. وَنَضَعُ الْمَوَازِينَ الْقِسْطَ لِيَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ فَلَا تُظْلَمُ نَفْسٌ شَيْئًا. Right? The mawazin al-qist. Qist here, it means absolute, judicious, without fail, without any iota of injustice, perfect justice. This will be the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هو الحكم العدل. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to deal with all of us just by His justice, none of us would deserve anything, and none of us would enter into paradise. That's why we say we will enter into paradise by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if we were to depend upon our deeds surely would fail in comparison to all of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. So we want to enter by the mercy of God. And this doctrine is more or less recounted by the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith of a member of Bani Israel. And this is something that will happen in the future, but the Prophet ﷺ is foretelling it, that he will come before God, this man, and he will be asked, how do you want to enter paradise? And he will say, I want to enter by my deeds. And he was a man who worshipped God for hundreds of years. And then Allah will say to him, well, let us weigh one blessing against your deeds, the mizan, right, which we're going to get to later. So the blessings will be of eyesight, will be measured against all of his deeds, and the blessing of eyesight will be heavier. And then he will be taken off towards hellfire. And then the man will interrupt and say, wait, let me enter by your mercy. And then Allah will enter him by His mercy. The Sahaba asked, even you, Ya Rasulullah, even you will enter paradise by Allah's mercy, not by your deeds? And look, you're the Prophet. He said, حَتَّى أَنَا إِلَّا أَنْ يَتَغَمَّدِنَ اللَّهُ بِرَحْمَتِهِ. Even myself, except that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala envelops me in His all-encompassing and all-enveloping mercy. So yes, the Quran says, أُدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. Right, enter paradise for that which you have done. And certainly there is a connection between our deeds and our entering of paradise. But in terms of our internal doctrine, what we want to depend upon in terms of how we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not by our deeds, but by the mercy of Allah. Because the deeds themselves indeed are also by the mercy of God. He is the one who gave us the tawfiq, the divine success to do them to begin with. So there will be this hisab, and that's kind of one of the main things of the next life. There will be the beginning of the hisab, or the reckoning. Before the reckoning, there will be something called al-hashr or al-mahshar. All will be gathered after the resurrection from their graves to an area that Allah will create specifically for that purpose. So it's something that, there is another opinion that says it's the actual earth itself, but the majority opinion is that everything will be destroyed, as the Quran says, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. So all will be destroyed, and then all will be resurrected, and Allah will then resurrect this place, this plane where all of humanity, all that have ever lived, will be gathered specifically for the purpose to await, to gather and to await for the hisab, or the reckoning. And again, there will be varying degrees of tribulation and difficulty commensurate with one standing with Allah. So people will be standing in their own sweat, naked, next to each other. Even Aisha remarked, "How is this so, Ya Rasulullah?" He said, "Yeah, Aisha, the matter is bigger than people worrying about who's standing next to whom and who's not wearing clothes. People will be in a state of torment, in a sense, thinking about where am I going to be and what's going to happen, and so forth." So the waiting for the reckoning will be agonizing, and it will be commensurate with one standing with Allah. For some it will be easy. For some it will be, they will have shade, right? And the hadith of the Prophet that mentions that there are 7 types of people who will be shaded by the shade of God, where on a day that there will be no other shade than the shade of Allah. And amongst them will be Imam al-Adil, the one who adjudicated justly between people if they were in a leadership position, and mutahabbina fillah, those who loved each other merely for the sake of Allah. رجل قلبه متعلق بالمساجد, someone whose heart is connected to the masjid. 2 young people who grow up together and do so for the sake of God. The person who is in the middle of the night in a moment of epiphany, so to speak, the fadat ayna, that they weep thinking about their situation with God. So these are all indications of complete sincerity, or utmost sincerity, and of sidq. So these types of people will have the shade on this day. وَإِنَّ يَوْمًا عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ كَأَلْفِ سَنَةٍ مِمَّا تُعُدُّونَ. And even when we say it's a day, well, a day in Allah's hisab is like 1,000 years of what we count. So this is actually a whole nother life. That's why it's the life of the barzakh, of the grave, is a life by itself that may feel longer than the life that you lived here. And then the life of the afterlife, even before entering into paradise or hellfire, is also a whole nother type of life. So this mahshar, then, we will be waiting there, and all will continue to wait until people grow tired and weary, and they just want the reckoning to happen no matter what the outcome is. And then they realize that amongst them are all of the prophets and messengers. So even the prophets and messengers will be fi ard al-mahshar. They will be in the gathering, and they will begin to seek out these prophets and messengers, and they'll ask them one by one, "Will you not intercede on our behalf to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so the reckoning may begin?" And they will go through all of them. They'll start with Adam alayhi salam, and he'll say something like, "I ate from the forbidden tree, and I don't think I'm in a position to do that. Nafsi, nafsi. I need to think about myself." And all of them, all down the line, will say the same thing, until they get to the last prophet, and he says, "Ana laha." And this last prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he will intercede on behalf of all of humanity. This is called ash-shafa'a al-uzma, or the greatest intercession. And so there's not a single human being, and also jinn, who's been created, except that they will avail themselves of this mercy of the Prophet ﷺ. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you except as a mercy towards al-alamin, towards for everyone. So included in this mercy will be even the disbeliever and the non-believer, and those who ever didn't even know Muhammad, and those who were not even from the ummah of Muhammad, from the previous ummah. So the people of Moses and Jesus and of David and of Solomon, and Joseph and others, all of them will benefit from the intercession, the shafa'ah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So after that, we'll look again. This is not in the order. I'll talk about that at the end. The third thing I have mentioned here is the adhab in general, or the torment of the afterlife. So disbelievers and disobedient believers will experience a torment in the grave. So this is the first kind of the beginning of the afterlife, adhab al-qabr. In the gathering also, the mahshar, and we talked about how people will be standing and under a sun that is unlike the sun we have now, and sweating, and some of them up to their ankles, some up to their knees, some of them will be completely submerged in their sweat. And then also eventually in hellfire by both body and spirit. So in all of those, there will be a torment of the body, like a physical torment, and also a torment of the spirit. And Imam al-Ghazali says the torment of the spirit is the greater one. He says that it is enough of a torment to have this inqita', or this bu'd, to feel that you're outside of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is enough of a torment, even despite the physical torments. And the hadith indicate the levels and forms of torment vary according to the sins of the aforementioned. So when the Prophet ﷺ, during the Isra and Mi'raj, he was given glimpses into the people of paradise and the people of hellfire, and he saw that people will be tortured or tormented with certain things depending upon the sins that they did. So the one who spoke, who lied and said they were a alim and said they were a scholar, but misguided and misled people, their tongue will be so big they have to carry it on their back. So all of those things that were in terms of ma'ani, right, in this life, then they will turn, and then the ma'ani will become mabani. They will become composite forms themselves in the next life, even though they were only realized in this life in terms of meaning. And that's one of the ways of the torment that will be there. Disobedient believers, however, will eventually be entered into paradise. So whoever has mithqala dharra fi qalbihi min iman, even if you have just an iota of iman in your heart, you eventually will be admitted into paradise. And Imam Bukhari narrates the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and he talks about the last person to enter into paradise, the very last one. So you can imagine what type of person will be the last one. This has to be someone who did many, many sins, but nevertheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring him closer. He will ask him to imagine. He said, ask for what you wish, and then he will bring him closer and closer until he gets to the doors of paradise. And then he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I just want to enter paradise. And the man before had swore all sorts of oaths and taken all sorts of covenants. He wouldn't ask anything else. But then he enters into paradise, and then he says, tamanna, then wish, and then anything that you wish, you'll have 10 times more. So this is the last person to enter paradise. So what about the ones who entered before that? And of course, the first person to enter paradise is our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, just as there's torment of the afterlife, there's also bliss of the afterlife, or thawab. So believers then will also experience bliss in the grave, the gathering, and eventually in paradise by both body and spirit. And Allah is oft forgiving, or Ghafurur Rahim. So even the most disobedient believer can be spared the torment of the afterlife by Allah's mercy. So the way that we understand Allah's justice is He may deal with us by His justice, but He is not compelled to do so, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not compelled to do anything. So we believe that if you committed the most vile of sins, anything less than shirk, anything less than the actual denial of God or associating partners with Him, but you're still a believer, but you committed all these vile things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive you completely, and He can enter you into paradise even without hisab, even without a reckoning. Allah may do that. He can choose to do that, and there's nothing preventing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from doing that. And we know that His afu, that His pardoning is bigger than the sins that we commit. But out of our comportment, out of our adab, our etiquette with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do not just merely depend on His mercy, we also seek to be faithful servants. And that's how, why we're talking about these sessions that we've been doing. The journey is the destination of all these blessings Allah has blessed us with, then the least we can do is be grateful and be thankful and do our best to uphold the commands and avoid the prohibitions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually instituted and made incumbent upon us, not for anything that returns to Him, not for any benefit that Allah will get out of it, but all the benefit goes back to us. There's not a single thing that Allah asks us to do except there is benefit in it for us, and there's not a single thing that He asks us not to do except that it's to avoid a harm, to repel a harm from us. So this is the epitome of mercy. Our God is not a vengeful God. He's not a wrathful God. He's the one who said, "Sabaqat rahmati ghadabi," that my mercy precedes my wrath. So we want to depend upon His mercy, and we want to be optimistic, and we want to look towards the afu, the clemency of God. But at the same time, we should not lull ourselves into a false sense of security, which would be the epitome of arrogance with Allah, and think that we can avoid His hellfire just because we want that to happen and we depend upon Allah's mercy. So the grateful servant also will not do anything to try to displease the master, to displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So after that, he talks about the resurrection, or nashr, or al-ba'th. So all human souls will be resurrected from their graves, no matter what the disposition of their bodies after death. So whether one was cremated, or whether one was eaten by a great white shark, or whether you exploded in an explosion, or if you were completely what do they say, destroyed by atom by a nuclear bomb, it doesn't matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, هو سيعيدك كما بدأكم أول مرة, right? He is the one who will bring you back, just like He gave you life and put you together to begin with. So everyone will have a resurrection, everyone will be lifted from their graves, and everyone then will make their way towards Ard al-Mahshar, towards the place where we will all be gathered. And so even though we may be bones, and some of the hadith mentioned that the only thing that remains in the grave will be the tailbone, and everything else is destroyed, except for the bodies of prophets and messengers and the awliya. So the bodies of prophets and messengers remain the same. This is Walead fil hadith, and also there's much anecdotal evidence to indicate as much, that the bodies of prophets and messengers and the true heirs of prophets and messengers, the awliya, that their bodies are not eaten by decomposition in their grave. Wallahu a'lam. Number 6, the bridge or the Siraat. So the Siraat is something that will happen after the Hashr and after the reckoning, the Mahshar. So the Siraat is a bridge that extends over hellfire from the gathering place to the ocean pond of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Even though there's some difference of opinion about that, does it actually go to the Hawd, or does it go to Al-Kawthar, which extends from the Hawd? So we know that the ocean pond or the Hawd of the Prophet ﷺ gets its water from Nahr al-Kawthar, which is one of the rivers in paradise, the other river being Salsabil, and the other two being An-Nil wal-Furat. So two of the rivers in this dunya also have extensions somehow in paradise. They are the Nile and the Euphrates, An-Nil wal-Furat, and also the two that are, let's say, indigenous to paradise, namely Al-Kawthar and Salsabil. So everyone traverses it. This is the Siraat. It's said in some of the hadith that if you were to actually just walk it, it would take you 3,000 years to get across it. Most of the ulama say that it is as narrow as the sword's edge. It could feel that way as you're walking across it, or it can be as wide as will accommodate everybody, depending upon one's circumstance. Again, all of the things that we're used to in the dunya don't apply to the afterlife. So Newton's laws of physics are not going to have any meaning in the afterlife, neither in paradise, nor in hellfire, nor in the beginning of the akhirah. So it can be narrow and it can be wide at the same time, depending upon the person who's crossing it. So everyone traverses it, right? And this bridge that extends over hellfire from the gathering place to the Hawd, everyone traverses it. Some in the blink of an eye. In other words, the speed Just blink your eye and you're already across. Others like a bolt of lightning. Others like a gale force wind. Some like a bird or a hawk. Others like a stallion. Others will run, some will walk. Others will crawl, and some will fall and get caught on the hooks underneath it for years. They'll be stuck on the hooks underneath the Siraat. And some of the ulama say that they will cry out and say, Wa Muhammadah. They will cry out for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, seeking his intercession to get out of this very tenuous and difficult situation they find themselves in by their own doing. And yet others will fall into hellfire and spend eternity there, while others will be emancipated by the intercession of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this will be another type of shafa'ah. So the shafa'ah, the intercession we talked about earlier, is called the shafa'ah al-uzma. When Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam lahu shafa'at ukhra. He has other intercessions that he will do. Some that will raise people in degrees in paradise, some that will get people out of hellfire, and some that will get people out of this torment of the Siraat if they are the ones to get hooked on the hooks underneath. The scale or the mizan the scales are experienced before the Siraat, or the scale I should say, where one's deeds are weighed. Though it is a literal scale, haqiqi, again, not like a scale in this life, but somehow it's literal, it's not just a metaphor for something, because the general principle is if we can understand something to be literal, then we understand it in a literal way. But we do not know its true nature. According to the sounder opinion, it is one scale for all of humanity rather than a set of individual scales. This is what Imam al-Dadir reports. Even though some of the ulama said everyone will have their own scale, he states the sounder opinion that it will be one scale that all will be weighed. Again, Newtonian laws of physics don't apply. Everyone can have a single scale at the same time. All will be applied simultaneously. Its justice is exacting and absolute, with no deviation from perfection. Prophets and messengers, angels, and those who will enter paradise without a reckoning will not be subject to the scale. So those who are not subject to the reckoning are not subject to the scale, because the scale or the mizan happens at the time of the hisab or the reckoning. فَمَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابُ بِيَمِينِهِ فَسَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا يَسِيرًا. Right? So whoever gets his book from the right, فَسَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا يَسِيرًا. Then they will have an easy hisab. It's an indication. So the kitab here, kitab al-a'mal, that was weighed in the mizan. Number 8, the ocean pond or the hawd of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is milky white, sweet smelling, surrounded by drinking vessels all around it, greater in number than the stars. You can't see the end of it. And whoever drinks from it will never go thirsty again. There are ocean ponds for every prophet. This was Imam al-Dardir's opinion, but the greatest is that of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then paradise and hellfire. Paradise and hellfire, al-Jannah wa nar, are the ultimate destinations for all of humanity. Paradise contains 7 levels. Its highest, Firdaus. That's why we ask for Firdaus. We ask for the highest. Others have stated 4 levels, or even 1 level, but with different names, difference of opinion. But the sounder one is that they are 7 distinct levels. Hellfire also contains 7 levels, but they extend downward. So the highest, which means the lightest in terms of torment, is that which is reserved for disobedient believers, which is called Jahannam, who eventually leave for paradise, as we said before. And once they all leave, once the last person leaves this Jahannam, then this particular part of hellfire will be no more, because it will have no more use anymore. The only ones that will remain will be the disbelievers, who will be there for eternity. Both of them, both paradise and hellfire, are already existing. This is the sound opinion of Ahl Sunnah, in an existence known only by Allah. So we couldn't construct a space shuttle or craft to go and try to find paradise. It's an alam al-malakut, in a sense that we cannot know by sensory perception in this life. Other aspects, just in general, one must also believe in the existence of the angels, and we know about Jibreel and Mikael and Israfil and Raqib and Atid and Munkar and Nakir, and I'm not going to go into all of the different duties that they do, but they do different duties for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do not have the ability to disobey Allah, so they are not going to be taken into a reckoning or a hisab, and they are going to be also permanent dwellers of bliss and paradise. And then the jinn, who are like us, shaitan is from them, so amongst the jinn, and they have the ability to disobey God or obey God. The Prophet ﷺ was sent as a prophet to them as well, and they also will have a reckoning and a hisab. Generally, we can't see them, and generally we avoid them like they avoid us. So the believers amongst them avoid the believers amongst us. It's only when the vile amongst us and the vile amongst them seek to have a connection or interaction or relationship between the two. And I don't want to talk too much about the jinn. It's kind of overblown, especially in the Muslim world, in our community, and people tend to blame everything on the jinn, from not being able to pray to not being able to keep their wudu and not being able to worship Allah properly. And I think we're nazlumul jinn are somehow mazlum, that we blame everything upon them. Oftentimes it goes back to our own inadequacies and shortcomings. So also believe in the messengers, all the 25 that are mentioned by name in the Quran, and also to believe that there are more than the 25 that we don't know the names of, like we said before. Also to believe in the awliya in general, not to think a specific person is a wali, but there are awliya that Allah has given a special sort of khasisa, something special about them. They have istiqama. They are stable and fervent worshippers of God and knowers of God, and Allah may give them something of what's called a karamat, right? Something that is extraordinary, and we say the greatest extraordinary thing is the istiqama. Akbar karama al-istiqama, to be upright, especially in the age that we live in. And in general, to also believe all that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has reported. So whatever that he has reported in the sound hadith or that comes from the Quran, we believe it to be true, and that he is the greatest of all creation. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So I'm going to stop there. That was the Sam'iyat. I kind of did it really in a summarized form, but I just wanted to kind of complete our look at Aqidah before we move on to spiritual refinement and so forth. So I see quite a number of questions. Let's see if we can get to some of them.